There comes a moment in life when you realize the harder you force things, the more life slips through your fingers. You force love, and it becomes cold. You force success, and it becomes exhausting. You force people to stay, and they disappear anyway. And slowly, painfully, you begin to understand something terrifying. Maybe your suffering was never caused by failure. Maybe it was caused by resistance. Because human beings have a strange obsession with control. We want to control timing, control outcomes, control emotions, control destiny itself. But the universe has never obeyed desperate hands. And, according to Carl Jung, the more disconnected a person becomes from their deeper self, the more violently they try to control the outside world. That is why modern people are exhausted. Not because life is hard, but because they are constantly fighting reality. Deep inside, you already know this feeling. That relationship you kept trying to save long after it died. That dream you chased even when your soul was begging you to stop. That version of yourself you tried to become just to be accepted. You felt it. The tension, the anxiety, the invisible war inside your chest. Because forcing something creates friction between your ego and your soul. And the soul always fights back. Most people think surrender means weakness. But Jung believed something darker. He believed the human ego is terrified of surrender because it fears death. Not physical death, psychological death. The death of control. The death of certainty. The identity you spent years building. That is why people cling to toxic relationships, dead careers, false identities, artificial happiness, because letting go feels like falling into an abyss. But what if the abyss is exactly where God speaks? Not through comfort, not through control, but through collapse. Look carefully at your life. The greatest transformations never came when everything was stable. They came after heartbreak, after humiliation, after loneliness, after everything you relied on was ripped away from you. Why? Because pain destroys illusion, and illusion is the prison of the ego. One Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Most people hear that quote, but they never truly understand it. Consciousness is painful because reality is painful. Reality destroys fantasies. You are not who you pretended to be. The world is not fair. People are not always loyal. Love is not always permanent. And control is mostly an illusion. That realization crushes people, but it also awakens them. Because the moment you stop forcing life, you begin hearing something deeper, something ancient, a quiet intelligence beneath the noise of the ego. Some call it intuition, some call it destiny, some call it God. Modern society teaches you to chase. Chase money, chase beauty, chase validation, chase status. Run faster, work harder, push more. But nobody asks a dangerous question. What if your constant chasing is the very thing blocking your path? Because desperation has energy. People can feel it. You can hear it in someone's voice when they beg for love. You can see it in the eyes of someone terrified of being alone. You can feel it in people who are obsessed with proving themselves. And strangely, the more desperate you become, the more life escapes you. Because desperate people do not move with faith, they move with fear. And fear disconnects you from guidance. Jung believed the unconscious mind constantly tries to guide us through symbols, dreams, emotions, and synchronicities. But most people are too loud internally to hear it. Their minds are crowded with anxiety. What if I fail? What if they leave? What if I'm not enough?
and so they force life into unnatural shapes. But forcing creates suffering because life is organic. You cannot force a flower to bloom faster. You cannot force healing. You cannot force love into existence, and you cannot force your soul into a destiny that does not belong to it.
Sometimes God removes people from your life because they were blocking your growth. But instead of trusting the process, you chase them, you beg, you overthink, you lose your dignity trying to hold on to something already dead. Not because you loved them deeply, but because your ego feared abandonment. There is a difference, and most people never learn it. The ego says, I need this person to survive. But the soul says, if it is meant for me, it will remain naturally. That is why peace only comes when you stop gripping life so tightly. Imagine holding sand in your hand. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it escapes. Life works the same way. There is a darkness people rarely talk about. Sometimes your anxiety is not a sign to push harder. Sometimes it is a warning, a spiritual signal that you are moving against your nature. Jung believed that when people ignore their inner truth, the psyche begins creating suffering, depression, emptiness, chronic anxiety, burnout, not always as punishment, but as correction. The soul becomes sick when forced into a life it never wanted. That is why some people achieve everything they dreamed of and still feel dead inside. Because success without alignment becomes spiritual torture. And deep down, they know it.
The strange thing about divine guidance is this. It rarely arrives when you are frantic. It comes in silence, after surrender, after acceptance, after the ego finally becomes exhausted enough to stop screaming. That is why solitude changes people. When you are alone long enough, the noise fades. And suddenly you begin noticing signs, a feeling, a dream, a coincidence, a strange pull toward a different path. Jung called these moments synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that seem guided by something beyond logic. And maybe that is how God speaks, not always through miracles, but through subtle direction. But you will never notice these signs if your mind is addicted to control. Some people spend their entire lives forcing doors that were never meant to open. And the tragedy is, they call it ambition. But there is a difference between discipline and desperation. Discipline is calm. Desperation is chaotic. Discipline trusts timing. Desperation fears it. One moves with purpose, the other moves with panic. And panic blinds people. It makes them choose relationships out of loneliness, careers out of fear, lifestyles out of insecurity. Then one day they wake up surrounded by things they fought desperately to obtain and feel nothing. Because the soul was never involved. Only the ego was.
Perhaps the deepest form of faith is this: to stop forcing life, to stop obsessing over every outcome, to stop trying to control people's opinions, to stop chasing what continuously runs from you, and instead become still enough to let life reveal itself. This does not mean becoming passive. It means learning the difference between aligned effort and fearful force. Because what belongs to you usually arrives with less violence than you expected. Not easily, but naturally. And what is truly meant for your soul often requires patience more than panic. In the end, maybe God removes things from your hands because your hands are too full for what is truly meant for you. But people misunderstand loss. They think every closed door is punishment.
Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes the relationship had to die. Sometimes the dream had to collapse. Sometimes the identity had to shatter. Because you cannot become who you are meant to be while clinging to who you used to be.
Perhaps the deepest form of faith is this: to stop forcing life, to stop
So, if life feels uncertain right now, if things are falling apart, if you are tired of forcing everything, maybe this is not the end. Maybe your soul is simply exhausted from fighting reality. Maybe it is time to release your grip. Maybe it is time to trust that not everything meant for you requires suffering to obtain. And maybe, just maybe, the moment you stop forcing life is the moment life finally begins guiding you.